good evening, and welcome. Tonight we'll be going over the history and geography of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a landlocked country in eastern Africa in an area known as the Horn of Africa. As you can see there, it makes a horn shape, hence the name. It has this border with Eritrea that we're going to talk about quite a bit in its history. Eritrea and Ethiopia's history is pretty closely linked for a lot of reasons, so I've already filmed a video about Eritrea, so if you want to know more details about Eritrea specifically, you can check that out. We're not really going to get into the details in this video because we're focusing on Ethiopia. So this border with Eritrea, and we have a border here with Djibouti. The border with Somalia is also pretty contentious. I mentioned it a bit in my video on Somalia, same deal. But we also have Kenya right here and South Sudan, which there's another border dispute right here. It's known as the Lenni Triangle. All three countries claim this little area here. Complicated. And then the border with Sudan up here. Ethiopia has a very interesting geographic feature about it, which you might be able to see from this map. The East African Rift comes right through Ethiopia there. You can see it creates the Great Rift Valley and essentially splits Ethiopia into two portions that look very different from one another. The Great Rift Valley, of course, is where the tectonic plates are splitting apart. So this is called the African plate over here. This is the Somali plate. The Somali plate is splitting off and slowly coming this way. So it creates a lot of interesting features in the earth here. There's a lot of lakes in this area. You can't really see because it says Great Rift Valley right there. There's a lot of lakes here. And a lot of very interesting volcanic activity. There are some volcanoes, not as severe as they are further down in the rift, but it does create some interesting features, mainly up here in this area known as the Afar Triangle, which you can see is triangular shaped. And up here we have the Danakil Depression, which is one of the hottest places in the world, if not the hottest place, to be honest. There are places that are uninhabitable, like you can't even breathe there because all of the sulfur and volcanicness of it is lethal. It's very, very interesting. Lots of salt up in this area though, and people come and mine the salt despite the very harsh, unforgiving landscape of the Danakil Depression. We also have lots of mountains, like I mentioned. The biggest ones in this are over here. They're the Awash Mountains. And then they get pretty high up in the Ethiopian highlands. The highest are the ones up here. They are known as the Simeon Mountains. Also up here is Lake Tana. It is the source of the Blue Nile River, which is kind of hard to see on here. With all the writing, you can see it really clearly over here, the Blue Nile. But yeah, you can actually see here the both White Nile and Blue Niles meet in Khartoum and become the Nile River. So it's an important lake in that aspect. This area, as you can imagine, is a lot more lush and green than the toxic volcanic regions over here. So there are lots of very important cities. Most important, of course, be the capital, Addis Ababa, which I've heard pronounced so many different ways. I've always said Addis Ababa, like my whole life. I've heard Addis Ababa, it's one of those. Like, take your pick. It's probably one of those, just depending on where you are in the world, is how it's properly pronounced. But other important cities, you can see Lalibela here. Lots of incredible churches in that area. Gondar was the capital for the longest time. And is Aksum on this map? I can't see. I don't think so. It's like up here-ish. But yeah, very important city in its history. Over on this end, we have an area called the Ogaden, which, as you can see, is very desert-like, very savanna-y, rough terrain. You can see over here, Dir Dawa is the second largest city in Ethiopia, and Harar is another very important city in its history. And let me see, we've got lots of forests down in this area. By forests, I mean like, African jungles with all the bells and whistles of African wildlife and plants, flora and fauna. But yeah, very interesting geographic place. And we're going to start off our history down in the Rift Valley and the Ogaden, in this area down here, because so many fascinating archaeological finds have been uncovered in these areas, namely some of the earliest hominids, a hominid like we are hominids as humans, but there have been many, many other species of hominids that we're slowly uncovering as we dig through the sands of time. The oldest hominid, I think Ethiopia is home to the oldest hominid ever found, period, which would have dated from 4.2 million years ago. The most famous hominid would be Lucy. She lived 3.2 million years ago, and she was an Australopithecus. Oh my gosh, I messed it up. Australopithecus afarensis. And she's very complete. I mean, as complete as a 3 million year old skeleton can be, but really revolutionized archaeology in this whole area of Africa. There's also been very early Homo sapiens found in Ethiopia. The oldest Homo sapiens have been found in Morocco, but the ones in Ethiopia date from about 200,000 years ago. So in a nutshell, it seems that this is where humans began, in this corner. From what we can see, the wheels of evolution were turning in this region of the world, in Ethiopia. In about the year 980 BCE, the kingdom of Dimit, again, lots of different pronunciations, would have been in what's now Eritrea. Talk about it more there, but it bled over into Ethiopia. It was a Sabaean culture, as in coming from Saba over in Yemen, which is just over here. Eventually, a more Semitic speaking people would arrive, who speak a language called Ge'ez, which is still around, and it would be kind of this mix of a culture that in the 1st century CE saw the rise of the Aksum Empire, which again, like I said, is up in this area here. The Aksumites were very, very powerful in the region. They dominated what was left of the Cushitic lands over here. They even hopped over the Red Sea and took over parts of Yemen. But things changed drastically in about 316 CE when Christianity arrived in the area, and they very happily converted. And it's other than Armenia, who converted in 301, they would be kind of like the oldest empire, major power to become officially Christian. They built some really amazing obelisks back in their pagan days, which are still kind of around. They were big tombs. That's kind of like what Aksum is famous for. Like when you mention Aksum, you think of the obelisks, but once Christianity came around, they stopped making those because they're Christian now. Eventually, though, Islam would arrive from the Arabian Peninsula up here, and they would start conquering. And as they came through in the 960s, I believe, around there, this area was kind of cut off from the rest of the Christian world that was up there. So They evolved into their own form of Christianity, which is still around today. Really interesting, different traditions and churches and things like that, different kinds of architecture, and it's a really neat religion, I think, and still around today, I should say. After Aksum was invaded and ransacked, it moved down to Lalibela, the survivors, and it became the Zagwe dynasty. That one would be overthrown by the Solomonic dynasty, which is the important one we're going to mention here. They ruled from 1270 to 1974, so very important in Ethiopia's history. They were called Solomonic because they claimed to be descended from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. So not just like a powerful empire, but a religious aspect to it too. Now, there's a very long period in Ethiopia's history where it was just a lot of different tribal conflicts. There are many, many different ethnic groups all throughout Ethiopia. So as they started to spring up and make contact with others, conflict happened. And the biggest one was probably in the 16th century, the clash with the Adal Sultanate, which was based in Harar here. The Adal Sultanate, of course, you can tell by the name, was Islamic. Harar in this region over here, and the Ogaden in general, is very Muslim-dominated. The Ogaden being mostly Somali people living there, but we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. While there was all that confusion happening, an ethnic group moved in known as the Oromo, which today is the largest ethnic group in Ethiopia. There's a really interesting kind of golden age known as the Gondarine period, when the capital moved to Gondar. Lots of really interesting architecture and art from that era. After 1769, they declined and entered a sort of isolation period until about 1855. It was known as the Menemesis, and it was just not a lot of outside contact with the world and dealing with all the internal struggles. But eventually, the outside world would reach out to them. In the 1880s, the European powers started to claim parts of Africa as their own territory. The British came to Ethiopia and were like, look, you guys are Christians, that's cool and all, we promise that we won't try to colonize you, because one of the main reasons that Europeans wanted to colonize was to spread Christianity, so there was really no point in doing that here. But the Ottomans up in Egypt were kind of hankering to come down and take up that area that the Europeans didn't want, since of course they were Muslim. So a lot of conflict there. But that all changed in 1889 when Menelik II became emperor. He essentially united everybody and created pretty much the borders of Ethiopia today. He was a big hero. I mean, there were some... Okay, so whenever I say there's a big hero in Ethiopia's history, there's always some exceptions. Just note that. But he helped to modernize the country. And when the Italians came knocking, saying, hey, we're a new power in Europe, we want to start conquering, they signed a treaty with them to give them Eritrea. And there was a bit of conflict. There was a short war. Ethiopia crushed them. But essentially, they handed over Eritrea to the Italians. Then in 1916, Haile Selassie became the emperor. Again, probably the most important historical figure in Ethiopia, modern Ethiopian history. He modernized Ethiopia even more, established a constitution, and was a very powerful ruler until 1935, when World War II is just around the corner. Italy has become a fascist state, and they invade Ethiopia. Haile Selassie flees to Britain. He goes to the League of Nations to appeal to the major European powers for help to reclaim his throne. The people there were very impressed by that, and came in and reconquered Ethiopia by 1941. The Italians in that period did quite a lot in Ethiopia. For one, they built a lot of infrastructure, a lot of very important roads and railways that still exist in Ethiopia today. And they abolished slavery, which was a very big thing in Ethiopia. There are many, many slaves in the country. However, the Italians also committed some very horrific war crimes that we're not going to get into because, yikes, they were bad, but many hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives in various massacres. Let's just put it that way. It was a bad time. So, in 1941, Ethiopia retained its full sovereignty. Haile Selassie came back onto the throne. There was an independence war with Eritrea in 1962. War with Eritrea would be kind of off and on for a bit. Hold on to that thought. And you know what's really interesting is that if you've heard of Rastafarianism, you want to check out my episode on Jamaica. It is based around Haile Selassie, Ras Tafari being his one of his titles, in a way. So the Rastas believe that Haile Selassie was a messiah, and so they worship him, even though he was constantly saying, "Hey, please don't worship me." They did, and it's a big part of their religion. Just a side note. He was overthrown in a coup in 1974 by a group, an agency known as the Derg. They installed a Marxist-Leninist state in Ethiopia. Again, I've said it like a million times on this channel. I feel like the one-party state, no elections, or no free elections, I should say. And some very bad things happened during this period. Again, there was like modernization and infrastructure, those things, but very bad things. The leader for the majority of that time was Mengistu Haile Mariam, and he led a program that's now known as the Red Terror, which you can imagine was a very horrific time in Ethiopia's history. Again, hundreds of thousands of people massacred and slaughtered and all of those terrible things. There's also a very big drought and famine, mainly in the Ogaden region over here. There is a war since this area is majority Somali ethnic people. They wanted to join Somalia. Ethiopia said no, and that's kind of where this border conflict originates. Horrible, horrible things. Mengistu was eventually tried in absentia for genocide, so he's currently in Zimbabwe hiding out, because if he returns to Ethiopia, he's done for. So there's that. He was overthrown in 1991 by various rebel groups that merged together and installed a democratic government, which is still in place today. So what's happening in modern Ethiopia? Like I said, there was this border conflict with Eritrea. It got really bad for a minute, but then was ended in 2018 by the current Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed. He actually won the Nobel Peace Prize for ending that conflict. When he came to power, he straight up went to like Asmara here and, negotiated. He took matters into his own hands. So he was very celebrated for that. There have been a lot more very serious droughts in the modern age. Many, many people starving and losing their lives because of that. One thing that the Ethiopian government has been trying to rectify future droughts is to build a huge dam off of the Blue Nile River over here. It would create hydroelectric power. It would be absolutely massive. It could power pretty much the whole Horn of Africa. And then you would have a dam, lots more water. But Egypt in particular is very upset by this. They have a long-standing treaty with Ethiopia and Sudan and all the other countries that have the Nile flowing through it, that nobody would disrupt the flow of the Nile. So Egypt says that's a violation of that. We don't know if the dam, it just opened a couple years ago, so we don't know the long-term effects of the dam yet. It's possible nothing could happen. It's possible it could slow the flow of the Nile. We don't know for sure just yet. But it's a big point of contention. Very many important powers, not just in Africa, but throughout the world, oppose it. there's a lot of people who are for it, mainly the Ethiopian government, of course, have like marched forward and built this. It's called like the Great Renaissance Dam, I believe. They're very adamant about building it. But that's that story. The main story that's literally happening right now as I speak is the Tigre Civil War. This region up here is Tigre. Many different rebel groups have formed up there that started way back in the like Marxist-Leninist Derg era, fighting for freedom and representation. There's been a lot of different ethnic struggles all throughout Ethiopia, way too many to mention, that sprung up in the early 2000s, 2010s, and the biggest was the Tigray, in that they have very like powerful protests. The Ethiopian government, responds very violently to things like that. It leads to more and more violence. It all kind of came to a head in 2020 when an election was postponed due to COVID, and the people up here said, you're just doing that to suppress our vote, and they went and voted anyway. And that really sparked, well, many things sparked, but that helped spark the Tigre Civil War, which is still going on today. They had a brief ceasefire, which ended literally like 2 days before I started filming this. I've been kind of holding off on filming it to see what's been happening up there, but it just seems like it's more fighting and horribleness and a lot of sadness. I'm not a fan of wars, as you can tell, but Abiy Ahmed, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, has been kind of spearheading this, what the Tigray are calling ethnic cleansing of the area. So kind of worrisome, let's put it that way. But in a nutshell, that is where Ethiopia is today. Addis Ababa is a big, thriving city. This city's been built up very, very nicely. Same with Dawa. The economy there is doing really well. Ethiopia exports so much coffee. The coffee that we know today pretty much originated in Eritrea in the south over here. And did I say Eritrea? Ethiopia over here. There's coffee in Eritrea too, and Kenya and Yemen, but this is where coffee culture really started. Isn't that interesting? Right in the area where humanity began. But anyway, I'm going to stop rambling. Let's get to this book. I'll look at some wonderful pictures of Ethiopia. It's a nice face. Another nice face there. And lots of little faces. How cute. They're kind of looking like, who are you and what are you doing here? Especially this one. Like, hello? Oh, look at this one saying like, hi. Here's the Blue Nile River. You can see why they wanted to dam it. It's very powerful. We've got, this is in Pretoria. It says protesting against what's been happening in Ethiopia, all the ethnic violence. And speaking of ethnic violence, that's kind of the situation. That's down in the Omo Valley, though, in the south. Nice little map of Africa. There's Ethiopia. The Simeon National Park. Those are the Simeon Mountains that I showed you are up here, the highest peaks in Ethiopia. Really beautiful landscape. I got a sweet little camel. There is a Walia ibex, a very endangered animal up in the mountains. Here's Addis Ababa. Interesting picture of the clouds and the rainbow. But you can see it's a pretty big metropolis there. This is a castle, as you can see, built during that Gondar Golden Age. It was modeled, as you can tell, on European castles. The Portuguese kind of helped out with the architectural design of that. But this was the emperor's castle during that Gondarine Golden Age. They're excavating in Aksum. Here is President Obama looking at Lucy. So this is Lucy. This is where we came from, in a way. Isn't that interesting? Some gorgeous cave paintings. There's so many interesting cave art in the Horn of Africa, mainly in the Somaliland region up here. I think that's my favorite rock art of all time, is the art up here in, I want to say in Berbera, pretty sure, near Hargeisa. Anyway, fantastic rock art. Here's one of the obelisks. This is like the big famous one in Aksum. Let's see, Emperor Menelik II, right there. The Battle of Adwa. That was a very important one. There's a lot of very famous battles. I just didn't mention any of them. Just so I wasn't mentioning battles after battles after battles. This was Emperor Haile Selassie. And a map of the border conflict with Eritrea, all the different zones that have been contended. When this book was published, this book came out in 2016, so this conflict was still ongoing at the time. This is Mengistu Haile Mariam. And here you have some people holding some flags. Ethiopia's flag. This is the parliament here. And this is their president at the time this book came out. They actually have a female president at the moment. And, goodness, was Abiy Ahmed not prime? I don't think so. When this book came out, Abiy Ahmed, I think, became prime minister in 2017. So yeah, this was the current prime minister, Haile Mariam Desalegn. Let's see. So this is kind of what's been happening. Really vicious reactions to huge protests. These pages don't want to turn today. This is, you could see he's got the UN blue helmet there, so it's a peacekeeper. It says he's Canadian. These are really funny baboons. They're gelada monkeys? I guess gelada baboons. They're really goofy looking, so this tourist is staring it down. Plowing the field there with his oxen and roasting some coffee beans. She's got some Tuff here, which is a grain that's very important in Ethiopia. They make their bread with it. The name eludes me for a moment, but it'll definitely pop up later. A light rail that was just added a few years ago in Addis Ababa. The Blue Nile Falls, isn't that gorgeous? Yeah, that's a really rough river. It's not navigable, as you can tell. So here's a good example of the Great Rift Valley. You can actually see the crack happening there. The two big mountains on each side. Let's see. Oh dear. Lots of drought issues happening in Ethiopia. And lots of big old moo cows. Lots of herding. The Awash National Park, you can see. Really beautiful landscape there. And this is a simian fox, an endangered animal. It's really cute. Let's see what else we have. Another wonderful face there. And another. And Oromo girls, they tend to wear these kind of like turban head coverings, especially the women. There's a whole family here. And these pages do not want to turn. There's Big Brother taking care of little brother there. A wonderful wedding. And this is in Harar, a very poor neighborhood, as you can tell. And they're paying very much attention to what's happening in school right now. It's talking about how like overcrowded some of these schools are. I think that's an airplane outside. I apologize. Look at this church, how beautiful. Yeah, that's definitely an airplane. I think it's moving on now. It's fading into the distance. So anyway, This is a really beautiful church in Aksum. Across the street from it is this kind of shrine, the Chapel of the Tablet. It's where the Ark of the Covenant is located. That's really wild to me. This is a Timket. It's their Epiphany celebration. And some Muslims praying at the mosque. This is a really important pilgrimage site for Muslims, Sheikh Hussein's tomb. Haile Selassie. It's talking about Rastafarianism there. Aptly reading the newspaper there. Let's see. A 13th century book written in the Giz language. So, good examples of what the kind of text looks like, which again is still spoken and written that way today. There's someone teaching it. Working hard on a painting, it says. Let's see what else we have. Some beautiful metal jewelry here from Aksum, it says. This culture, let me show you closer there, the Surma, they not only do these like lip plates here, but they also have really beautiful I'm sorry, I was listening to the car outside. Really beautiful, like body painting with chalk. It's really neat. And getting ready for Timkets there, getting the drums out. On the big important holidays or on like church days, they wear all white like this. Everyone does. Shredding right here, being super cool. Running around playing. So when you're little, it's just fun to run and play foosball. And of course play soccer out in the street with all your friends. Abebe Bikila, a very famous marathon runner in the Olympics. He ran barefoot and won gold. This is another Sorma tradition of stick fighting. Waving the flag here. It says it's to celebrate the anniversary of the fall of dictator Mengistu Haile Mariam. Gorgeous church here. This is a Christmas mass, it says. And on Timket, Feast of the Epiphany, January. And this is Meskel, another important holiday in the Ethiopian church. Food, lots of spices and kernels of things there. Injera, that's the name of the bread. This bread here, and then they lay it out and use it as a plate and utensils and things like that. Making pancakes there at the market. Some more injera bread all rolled up, ready to eat, and lots of different spices and things for sale. And doing the coffee ceremony. It's so interesting how many cultures have like tea ceremonies and coffee ceremonies like that. It's really neat. Let's see what food we've got. Dorowat, which looks divine. And some yellow split peas with turmeric sauce. Yakikalicha. Nice. And then a big old map of Ethiopia. You can see just how mountainous it gets. Just how flat it gets. You can see the Danakil Depression up there. And in the grand scheme of things, that's where Ethiopia is located in the world. So that's going to be it for tonight. I have 2 more Ethiopia videos coming up for you this week. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a very good night. Good night.